Got it. The Mishnah today is actually incredible. I don't know if this will be the only. It could be that it'll be a 2-week Mishnah. I'm not sure, but it's incredible. The thing that we hit in the Mishnah, we hit 2 words, which is the next number 9. It's the next midah, the next characteristic that you have to develop in acquiring chachma, and it's called b'shimush chachamim, in the service of rabbis, and that is the next thing that's necessary. There are certain characteristics that need to change inside of a person, which we've been discussing. Happiness and all those kinds of things. And now we're discussing more educational things. And the first of the educational things is b'shimush chachamim. And it doesn't say learning from rabbis, but it says shimush chachamim, which means really attending to rabbis and being involved and engaged with rabbis. It is a very, very fitting that this Mishnah came tonight, because I was anyway going to speak about, there was this past week, as I'm sure everyone is aware, that on Friday, actually on Purim Day in Yerushalayim, on Shushan Purim here in the rest of the country, there was the Petirah, the loss of Rabbi Kanievsky. Chaim Kanievsky, if you've seen pictures, then you have a little bit of idea who he was. Short of that, you probably had very little idea of who he was. He found a little bit of politics, so the people had tried to get him involved in politics, so his name came up in a few issues. But at the end of the day, Reb Chaim was the leading Torah giant in the Torah world, and not just in the Lithuanian Torah world, in the Hasidic world, in every walk of Torah life. He was considered what's called the Gadol Hador. He was considered the giant of the generation. And I spent a lot of time myself working through this and understanding of what did he mean to me. Why was his loss in fact something that was very profound, and what I think that all of us that what we call the Hamayinam, what regular people can take from him. And I want to spend a little time understanding that. And I think that by the time I finish, we will all recognize and feel what it means to have a profound loss, and what it means to have a rabbi like this in our lives, in our existence. So we know that we are instructed aseh lecha rav. Aseh lecha rav means you have to have a Rebbe. Having a Rebbe means having a teacher, having a guide, having a friend, having somebody who can help you through situations, not just a person who you can call and ask, is this kosher, is this not kosher, but a person who understands leiv v'nefesh, who understands your heart and your soul, and has an ability to be able to guide you through things, has an ability to be able to instruct you through things, and has an ability to be able to be a living example for the kind of Jew and the kind of human being that you want to become. We're told in the Torah, mipnei seva tokum, that you have to stand up in front of an old person. An old person, we understand, means a 70-year-old person. That is, a person who's 70 years old or not, when you walk into a room, you have to stand up for them. They could be an Am Ha'aretz, they could be an ignoramus, they could be not a person who is well-versed in Torah, they could be a person who is not necessarily representative of Torah. A person walks into a room, 70 years old, we stand up for that person. Then v'hadarta pnei zaken. Then we're taught that vadarta, and the word vadarta means to glorify or to recognize the beauty of the face of a zaken. And what's the beauty in the face of a zaken? What's a zaken as opposed to a seva? A zaken does not have to be somebody who is of any age. A zaken is, as we've spoken about before many times, the word zaken means zeh kana chachma. This one is acquired wisdom. And that a person through their depth of understanding and knowledge, and through their experience in life, so then they have acquired a wisdom that we have an obligation to be able to show respect to. Our rabbis tell us that there was an increase of machlokas, of argument in the world during the time of the Second Temple, during the time of Hillel and Shammai. Arguments proliferated. They started with 3, ended up with 312 in the students of Hillel and Shammai, and there was just It was just off the, sort of out of control. And it now is de rigueur. Is now we live with arguments. We live with this concept of machlokas and of trying to resolve machlokas and figure out what the halacha, what the proper way to go is. But there was a time when machlokas was a shock, when everything was very clear in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu up until the time of the Second Temple. Things were very clear, and there was a very clear way of dealing with disputes and dealing with machlokas, or things that we weren't clear about, things that we then needed to apply, the laws that had already existed, to apply them. There was a clear way and a clear pathway to be able to do that. But then machlokas proliferated. Now rabbis wonder, why did dispute proliferate? And one of the answers our rabbis give is because they weren't mishamesh talmidei chachamim, because they didn't serve Torah scholars. Now that doesn't mean because they didn't bring them a cup of coffee. Doesn't mean because they didn't bring them their slippers. But what it means is that they weren't sufficiently connected to their rabbis. And because they weren't sufficiently connected to their rabbis, the lessons that their rabbis had to teach them, the lessons of life and the lessons of existence that the rabbis had to teach them, of how to live and exist within Judaism and within Torah, so then that they weren't able to get. Now, there are legitimate reasons why that happened, but at the end of the day, this concept of being around the rabbi, seeing what a rabbi does, seeing what a Talmid Chacham, what a Torah scholar does. When I use the word rabbi, I use it loosely, because we're not talking about somebody who has a job called a rabbi. We're talking about somebody who is a Talmid Chacham, who's a Torah scholar, somebody who is truly a guide, a wise person, who the Torah has made them wise and has given them the ability to be able to be able to guide and to be able to understand the world in a certain kind of way, because they live in that world in a certain kind of way. And therefore, when we don't attach ourselves to that, that's the structure of Judaism. This is, there are many people that try to get away from that structure. There are shuls that don't have rabbanim. We dafka don't want a rabbi. You're idiots, right? You dafka don't want a guide, right? Because not having a guide, not having somebody who is there, who can serve as an example. So then that's the antithesis of the way the structure of Judaism is. There was a rabbi by the name of Shimon Amsuni. Shimon Amsuni had an idea, and I've spoken about this before, but he had an idea that he had a theory. And the theory was that the word et, aleph taf, the word et, meant something. It wasn't just part of a phrase, right? When it says, Breishis bara Elokim es hashamayim ves haaretz, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and that we translate it really as just the. We don't really translate the word es. He had a theory, and he said, no, the word es means something. And what does the word es mean? The word es means with. So he started expounding the Torah. Breishis bara, in the beginning, God created es hashamayim ves haaretz, with heaven and with earth, all of the appurtenances, all of the stuff that went along with it, all of the hosts, so to speak, that went along with the heavens and the earth, that was created on that day. Great. And then he went to the next one, es Cain es Hevel, that when she gave birth to Cain, she gave birth to Hevel, Chava. And it says she gave birth with Cain, if his theory is correct, with Cain, with Hevel. And what do our rabbis say about the birth of Cain and Hevel? That both Cain and Hevel had a twin sister. And that Cain's twin sister married Hevel, and Hevel's twin sister married Cain, so that they could populate the world. That means that with Cain was born another person. With Hevel was born another person. And he starts to go through the Torah this way. And every single time the word es appears, he translates that as with, and it fits in. There is a Maimer Chazal, there is something that a rabbi say that fits right into that, and that it is an incredible theory, and he's building it and building it and building it. And then he hits the pasuk that says, Es Hashem Elokechem Tiru, says, with the Lord your God you shall fear. And if his theory is correct, that the word es means with, that means there's something else besides God that you have to fear. And he froze and he said, there's something wrong with my theory, because there is nothing else that you could fear with God. And therefore he looked at it and he said, my theory is corrupt. It's corrupt. It's wrong. It was a great try. It was a beautiful attempt. And he took his magnum. This was his life's work. And he took it and he shelved it. And he said, I'm wrong. Comes along Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva says, you're making a blunder. You are absolutely correct. The word es means with. And you know how we have to understand that pasuk? Es Hashem Elokechem Tiru, with the Lord your God you have to fear, along with the Lord your God. Lerabos Talmidei Chachamim, it's coming to include Torah scholars. That Torah scholars also require a degree of awe, a degree of respect, a degree of yira, because we understand that they were given a mandate from God himself. Just like the king of Israel was given a mandate from God, just like the Kohen Gadol was chosen, so too our Talmidei Chachamim, though they weren't voted, they weren't chosen, there was no lottery, there was nothing to put them in their place, but they rise to the top. And when they rise to the top, we recognize that those are our eyes, those are our ears. That is the structure that keeps Klal Yisrael, keeps the Jewish people alive. And therefore, it requires us to have that kind of relationship with them. First of all, to have a relationship with them. Second of all, to be aware of them. And third of all, to have that sense of awe. And what is the awe? The awe is not of the position. The awe is the Torah. The awe is the awe of their Yiras Shamayim. The awe is the awe of their Kedusha and Tara, of their holiness and of their purity. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai spent 12 years in a cave, 12 years. Ladies and gentlemen, it's important for us to try to visualize what that means. 12 years doing nothing other than learning Torah and praying. There was no Starbucks in his world. There was no Netflix in his world. There was no Zoom in his world. It was complete and total concentration on God and on godly things in a cave, buried in sand up to his neck, each day for 12 years. Did you ever have an experience of 12 minutes where you were just totally focused on God, on Torah, on davening, on mitzvah? Like the world just falls away, and for 12 minutes you're completely and totally immersed in something. You feel incredible. During sometimes on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, or during one of those songs, you close your eyes and you sort of just waft along, and you get caught up in it, and you realize, wow, that thing took 12 minutes. I'm not being exact in my timing, but you realize, wow, I was like transported to another world during that time. Now imagine doing that for 12 hours. How you would feel after 12 hours of that. Imagine after 12 months of that. Imagine after 12 years of that. What kind of kedusha, what kind of holiness, and what kind of tara, what kind of purity would be emanating from you. That is the way we look at our gedolim, at our giants, at our Torah leaders. That we look at them as saturated with holiness and with purity. They tell over stories of Reb Chaim. They talk about his what we call hasmada. They talk about his diligence in learning. I got a hold of his learning schedule. His learning schedule started at 12 o'clock at night with a thing called Tikkun Chatzos, which is when we pray to God for the destruction of the temple and we beg him to return the temple. It's done by the holy people. And then he would learn 8 pages a day. We, Daf Yomi, think we're big knockers. We learn 1 page a day of Talmud, and that's a huge accomplishment. 8 pages a day of Babylonian Talmud, 8 pages a day of Jerusalem Talmud, 10 chapters of Shulchan Aruch, and it goes on and on and on. This is what he was doing every second of the day. He was a prolific writer. He was a giant in Torah. People would ask him questions from all over. Somebody asked him once, and he was very succinct in his answers. Somebody asked him, there was a question of whether there was a vav in his name or not, whether the Hebrew letter vav appeared in his name. That's the proper way to spell it or not. He sent him a letter. And Reb Chaim sent back a letter. The guy opens it up and it looks like a blank piece of paper. He says, I can't, like I sent Reb Chaim a letter. He asked him if I should put the vav in or not. And he sent me back a piece of paper. What's he trying to say to me? And he turns the paper upside down, inside out. His brother looks at him and says, look again. It's not an empty piece of paper. Look in the corner, top right. There's a vav. It's one letter. That's it, one line. That's the answer. The answer is write it with a vav. That's where Chaim was. Everything was succinct. There was no time wastage. He was what we call Oiske Cheshbon. He was calculated down to the last second. And because his life was a life that was lived in Kedusha. They tell over amazing stories. They tell over stories of things that happened in his lifetime, things that happened to him to assist him in his learning and in his Torah. The bright light of Torah that he was illuminated and touched every single person in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let's call a spade a spade. That's got as much shaychus, as much connection to us as Lakshan Kugel. It's like, what are you talking? Like, great. I'm so glad there are rabbis like that. What does that have to do with me? How is it possible for me to emulate that rabbi? What does that rabbi's life practically have anything to do with me that when you tell me that I have to have a rabbi, not only does every individual have to have a rabbi, but the world has to have a rabbi. Great. But it's got to be somebody I can learn from. It's got to be somebody I could talk to who knows what's going on in the world. They tell over a story. I heard another rabbi, a colleague of mine, say that the story happened to him. He went to Reb Chaim and he said to him, he asked him, what bracha do you make on schnitzel? So Reb Chaim said to him, what schnitzel? So the Rebbitzin calls out from another room, you know the stuff I make you on Tuesday. Oh. Now I remember. Great. Like, that's amazing. That's like planet Mars. That's like what we call mufka from Elam Hazeh. He's completely removed from this world. What does that have to say with me? I know what Netflix is. What shaykhs does that have? What connection do I have to him? What could I possibly learn? That I'm supposed to sit and learn like that all day long? Shkayach, thank you very much. Not going to happen. So what is he? How is he an example for us? The average person who's fighting to come to learn Torah a few times a week. What does Reb Chaim have to say to them? So let's look at it again. Because what is a gadol? What really is a giant in Torah? The Torah tells us that Vayigdal tells by Moshe Rabbeinu that Moshe Rabbeinu grew up. And it tells us twice, right in the same section of the Torah, that Moshe Rabbeinu Vayigdal, Moshe Rabbeinu grew up. And our rabbis wonder, why do you have to tell me twice? It's like stuttering. And the rabbis answer, because one time is to tell me that Moshe Rabbeinu grew up chronologically. He was now no longer a young child. And then the second one was to tell me that Moshe Rabbeinu grew up, that he became a gadol. He became a giant of a human being. But the only problem is that the Torah doesn't tell me what is a giant. The Torah doesn't tell me in what capacity and in what aspect Moshe Rabbeinu became a gadol. It just says Vayigdal, that he became a gadol, but didn't tell me how. But if you look in the Torah carefully, you'll see the next three stories. There were no stories about Moshe. There's a story of Moshe being put in a basket and then getting picked up by the daughter of Paro. But all of those great stories that we tell of Moshe and his upbringing, none of that stuff is in the Torah. Before Moses is chosen by the sneh, by the burning bush, the Torah tells me three stories. Story number one, he wants to know what's going on with his brethren, with the Jews. He goes out, rolls up his sleeves. He starts to work with them. And then he sees an Egyptian killing a Jew, and he kills the Egyptian. Story number one. Story number two. Moshe Rabbeinu sees two Jews fighting with each other. It was the two Jews that saw him actually kill the Egyptian. And Moshe says to them, what are you fighting? What are you hitting each other for? Rasha, you're a wicked person. Why are you hitting the other person? You're not allowed to hit people. And then Moshe realizes that he's now in trouble because he was seen and the news was going to get to Paro, so he ran away. And he ran away to a place called Midjan. And in Midjan, there he saw a bunch of girls being harassed by a bunch of guys. And he saved those girls. Happens to be one of them eventually became his wife. But those are the three stories. Then the very next story the Torah tells me is the Torah tells me about Moshe being chosen at the burning bush to take the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim. What was the Torah trying to tell me? What the Torah was teaching me is, what is a gadol? A gadol, a giant, is a person who lives not for himself, but lives for others. a person who understands what it means to step outside of themselves and to give and to worry and to be concerned about and to be there for other people. A gadol, a giant in Judaism, is a person who is not focused on themselves and their self, but are focused on the world. A giant is a person whose I means not just me, but when I say the word I or say the word we, it means everyone. That's what a gadol is. Child is born. By his bris, we look at that child and we say, Zeh hakatan gadol yiyeh. This child should become a gadol. Kind of stupid bracha is that? Unless, God forbid, something happens in that child's life that it doesn't live, that child's becoming a gadol. That's just the way it happens. I know it's sometimes hard to imagine. You look at an adult, you look at a 70, 80-year-old adult, and guess what they once were? A baby. Because that's the way it goes. You start off as a cut and you end up as a gadol. That's life. You can't give a person a bracha like that. Right? Person, whatever, you can't. It's not something that God is blessing. It's something that they have. It's something that's happening in their lifetime with your blessing, without your blessing. So why are we giving this bracha to a child? Because what is katnus? What is being small? What is a katan? It doesn't mean a little baby. What it means is somebody who is baby-like. And what is baby-like? When a baby is born, fists are clenched, held against the body, wrapped into itself. It's all about itself. Child is sitting in the arms of the parent. The parent is upset. Child cries, not because the parent is upset, but because the child wants to eat, because the child needs to go to the bathroom, or the child needs to go to sleep. Everything in the life of that child is about himself. That's what a katan is. And you could be 60 and 70 and 80, and you could be a katan. And that's the bracha that we give to a child. Zeh katan gadol yiyeh. Now you're focused on you, but that you should learn in your lifetime how to focus on other people. And that's a gadol. That's what I want to hear about my Torah leaders and my giants. They say about the Brisker Rav in about Reb Chaim of Brisk in the 1905, there was a fire in Brisk, burnt down most of the city. People were homeless. Reb Chaim was sleeping in the shul. His house was not affected. His family came to get him to bring him home so he should sleep in bed. And he looks at them, he says, how is it possible that I could go and sleep in a bed when my people, when there are Yidden that are homeless right now? Reb Chaim understood what it was to carry the world on his shoulders. The Kohen Gadol was able to do vidui. He was able to do confession for the entire Jewish people. Now, that's not a Jewish thing. One guy dies for our sins. That's not Jewish. That was the other guys. So what does that mean that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest on Yom Kippur, can atone for the sins of every other Jew? Because he is every other Jew. He carries the blessed breastplate on his chest. On the breastplate was the names of every single tribe engraved into every one of the stones. He carried the Jewish people on his shoulders. There were 2 epaulets that had 6 tribes on the one side, 6 tribes on the other side. He carried the Jews because he was a part and a parcel of every single Jew. He looked at everybody else as being part of his I. Im ein ani li, mi li. If I'm not for me, then who's going to be for me? But ani la'atzmi, when it's all just about me, mo ani, what am I? When I use the word ani and it means one person, then I'm nothing more than a child. But when I use the word ani in its description of the entire Jewish people, that's called a gadol. They say about I'm blanking on the name. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was a giant of the previous generation. They say about Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that he was an old man and he had a chasana to go to, a wedding to go to in Bnei Brak. Lived in Yerushalayim, 45-minute drive. Somebody drove him, of course. He went to Bnei Brak. It was a wedding of two orphans, a girl whose parents had died, a boy whose parents had died. And he asked to stay over in Bnei Brak that night. There was no reason to stay over in Bnei Brak. As old as he was, he could still go back to Yerushalayim. 45-minute drive, it was nothing. They asked him, Rabbi, why do you want to stay in Bnei Brak? So he said, you know what happens the day after the wedding? The young bride and groom open up all their gifts and they look through their gifts. They look through their presents and they go to their parents and they say, oh, we got this beautiful challah cover and we got a sweet, a kiddush cup and a beautiful knife. And oh, isn't this beautiful? And they kvell with their parents. Who are these kids going to kvell with? I stayed here so that I could sit with them the day after their wedding and I could go through their gifts with them and I could joke with them and they could show me everything and they could feel good about it. It's a person who's given over to Klal Yisrael. What do you think Reb Chaim wanted to be doing? He was what we call a Sarah Torah. He was the prince of Torah. His entire life was learning Torah. What did he want to be doing every day? He wanted to be sitting and learning Torah. And it's what he did every minute of the day, except for those hours a day when he sat and people would stream through his house. You walk into his house, it was like walking into the Chafetz Chaim's house. It was very bare. There was no fancy couches. There were no fancy tables. There was a couch people could sit on. There was a table that he could eat on, and there could be Makadosh Kiddush. He could do Kiddush and be Makadosh Shabbos on that table. It was a different kind of existence, but he sat there for hours a day and he listened to every trouble and woe of every Jew. People would come far and wide to come and to talk to him. And somebody asked his child, doesn't your father just want to be sitting and learning? He says, no, my father recognizes that people rely on him, people need him. If they need him, he's there for them. That's a gadol b'Torah. Somebody who is given over completely to the Jewish people. It's not about me. It's about God. It's about Torah. It's about you. And that's, to me, my takeaway from Reb Chaim. His learning touches me. But it's another world. His Kedusha, his holiness, it's amazing. But it's another world. For me, it's to know that there was a Jew who wasn't worried about himself, wasn't worried about his comfort, wasn't worried about his pleasure, but was worried about every single human being, every single Jew. And that's the light that went out last Friday. That there was a Yid in this world that was like the energy box of the world, was a source of love, care, and concern that touched Jews thousands of miles away without them ever being aware that there was such a thing in the world. You know, you walk into a room sometimes, and there are people that light up rooms. They exist. They walk into a room, the whole room lights up. And then 50, 75, 100 people pile into the room, but the room is still lit. You can't really see them, but you know that light is adding to the light, to the feeling in the room. That's what Reb Chaim did for this world. Without ever having to talk to him, without ever having, I happen to have seen him, I happen to have gotten a bracha from him. I spoke with him once. But even without that, the fact that there was that energy box in the world fueled and gave strength to me. And that's what we have to look at. That's what we have to hold on to. What we have to be impressed by and to use as a paradigm and an example. The amount of hours that he learned today is not an example for me, not for the average person, but the way he lived his life, not about himself, but for other people. That is a paradigm for us. And that needs to be an example for us. And that's what I need to shed a tear for. And that's what I need to grab into my life. To learn how to stop living just for me and to take the word me and to build that word me, that when I say me, when I say I, it means many people. And that needs to grow. That number needs to become bigger and bigger. And that's what I look at and say, that was my rabbi. That's my paradigm. That's my example of what it is to be a Jew. And that loss touches me. And that's what I'm trying to fill that void, to try to find another example for myself, to try to find another guide and another paradigm, and to understand the critical nature of looking up to a gadol, of looking up to a Torah giant. And a Torah giant is not just about his scholarship. A Torah giant is about his godless, about his real greatness, which is his care and concern for other people. It's a thought. I think it's a little bit different than what many people are writing and saying, focusing in on his incredible scholarship and knowledge, and I too am. I'm not ignoring chas v'shalom. I'm not belittling that or ignoring it. I'm just saying that there's something else that don't forget the other part of it, which really makes him the gadol. It's not the scholarship that propels you into this place. There are plenty of scholars out there. There are plenty of people out there that know what's called kol Torah kula. They know everything. Reb Chaim knew everything. There's a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yeshua Hartman, very, very big Talmid Chacham himself. And he wrote commentaries to the Maharal, the very difficult sefer. The guy's up there. He's in the Torah world recognized as a very big scholar. So he saw a passage in the Maharal, and in the Maharal it said that the Mashiach is going to come from Hebron. It's going to begin in Hebron. And he didn't know what the source of that was. And he used, computer programs, and he did searches, and he did everything, and he couldn't find any source for it. He once saw Reb Chaim, and he said to Reb Chaim, he said, Rabbi, the Maharal says this, what's the source for it? So he sees Reb Chaim going like this. And he hears him saying the following thing. Babylonian Talmud? No, it's not there. Jerusalem Talmud? No, it's not there. Medrash? No, it's not there. He was a living Google. That's unbelievable. But other than just impressing me and saying, wow, that's cool, like that's amazing, I'm not going to be like that. I have a hard time remembering my name sometimes. This is not, that's not my aspiration, because it's not going to happen. So I look at Reb Chaim and I say, what was incredible was that along with that scholarship came a love and a concern for every single Jew. And that's what I want to emulate, because that I can bring into my life. Okay, it's my thoughts. I'm going to put this up online in Mirz Hashem, and hopefully by tomorrow. And I think that it's important. It's an important concept, something to think about. And it happens to fit in nicely in our study of Pirkei Avos, of Shimush Talmidei Chachamim. Shimush Talmidei Chachamim means making sure that we recognize the paradigm that our rabbis really are, and the influence that they can have in our lives, not just from their knowledge and scholarship, but from their personalities and from their midos and their character. Okay, everybody should have
Thank you.
a beautiful night. And we have something in common, by the way, that even though for me it's called AM and for you it's called PM, it's my night like it's your night. It's still, 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm sorry, it's still night. Even for me, starting at 4:30 is still night. Okay.
Thank you,
Everybody should have a beautiful
Thanks,
day
Rabbi.
and a beautiful week. It's great. Mamish, great to see everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Shar Koach.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Be well.
And you. Great to see you.
Amen. Thank you.